Hey guys, this is week 35 of my series titled 52 Weeks of Reaper. Every week for 52 weeks, I'll be releasing a new video focusing on a key feature in Reaper. So let's jump right in. So for this week, our topic and our focus will be part 2 of rendering in Reaper. So let's jump right in. So last week we went over the basics of this render window. So let's jump into some scenarios. So up here, by default, like most DAWs, you'll have the option to render via your master mix, your master bus. But Reaper actually has all these options here. So we can say select selected tracks stems. So what that means is I can render these 3 tracks right here. And if you notice over here, it says nothing. It's grayed out. It says render no files. It's waiting for me to select tracks. So we select 1, 2, 3 tracks. So if we look over here now, we will notice that it now says render 3 files. So it is now ready to render these 3 tracks as stems, individual stems. And up here now, we can also select the range. So right now it is set up to render these 3 tracks as separate stems, but it's gonna do the entire track from start to finish. So what Reaper deems as the entire project is basically all the way to the end of the last piece of media. So whether it's video, an image, a MIDI file, an audio file, and even right here at the end, I have what Reaper calls an empty item. So Reaper does have the option for you to load something called an empty item. So it's kind of just a placeholder. It does nothing. It makes no sound. It generates no image. It's just there. And I guess I have to do a video just on empty items because you can use them in clever ways. In this way, I'm using it basically as a marker where the song is going to end. So when I'm selecting my range for the length of the song, sometimes because I have a tail of reverb or delay that's gonna happen even after everything stops, and it's gonna fade and tail off, you don't want it to cut off because the render stopped when the files stopped, when the media item stopped, because everything ends here, but we have a tail of reverb that needs to go further. So I use the empty item as a way to extend past the end so that we get the reverb or the delay tail to get to play out and fade off. So I would usually just highlight anything in the project, Control A to select all. I have a keyboard shortcut to time select everything from start to finish. So whatever's highlighted, it'll time select. So if I highlight just this and I hit that keyboard shortcut, it'll time select just that item. So the range is now just this item. So I hit Control A to select everything on the arrangement screen. Then I hit that keyboard shortcut and it's gonna time select basically from start to finish. And the end is being dictated by the end of this empty item. So at this point, that's what Reaper deems as the entire project. So I don't want that. So I can say with these 3 tracks selected and this range selected, I want you to render based on the time selection. So it's gonna render the source, which is those selected tracks, and within the time selection, which is right here. This time selection right here. So it's just gonna render from here to the ending here. and that's what I want. And if you notice, it says 3, render 3 files. If I went here, deselected this one, it now says render 2 files. So it's a pretty cool option to have. Let's go back, select all 3 of these tracks, and then it says render 3. And I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna select a directory. I'm gonna create a fake directory. I'm gonna call it fake. Hit open and hit save. So it's gonna go in there. Now I don't like the name. I don't like the name. And it's gonna be doing 3 files. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell Reaper to give it the name based on the track. So right now, these tracks are named the same based on the instrument. So I'm gonna change the names. Decent Sampler 1, Decent Sampler 2. By the way, check out my live stream every week where I present you guys with free VST plugins. Decent Sampler is one of the free VST plugins. Link is in the description for those live streams. Back to our regularly scheduled program. So now I want to set it up where it's going to render these 3 tracks within this range, and then it's going to automatically label each file based on the name of the track. So this is where wildcards come in. So I can actually clear this out, get rid of that, hit the wildcard button, and there are a bunch of options. So we can do it based on project information. So we got project, we got title, author, notes. It goes on and on. What we want is track. So we select track. So now it's gonna render those files and label each file based on the track. So once I hit render, let me zoom out, hit render, and it's gonna render them out. So it did the range, it did the 3 tracks right here. You see up here, it shows you the 3 tracks. Then Reaper is showing you the analytics of the file. We'll render something more substantial, and then we'll go over the whole render view and the analytics. One of the cool things that Reaper just added was that you can actually play the render from here. So what you're looking at here, you can just click and it'll play what was rendered. So cool feature to have, because sometimes I'll render something and I don't want to have to go open a media player to play it back, an MP3 file mixed down. And then sometimes dealing with sample rates, it causes issues with the computer, because now I'm opening something in Windows and then the sample rate switches back to Windows and it just gets wacky and it's annoying. So it's cool to know that once I render something out, I can literally just play it right back from this window. From the render window, there's an option here for you to play, stop, loop, all that good stuff. And volume is all here, right within your render window. At the bottom of the render window, there are some options here. You can launch the file. It'll launch it in a media player of your preference. You can set whatever the default is. It'll just start playing it in Windows Media Player or VLC Media Player or whatever media player you set as your default within your OS. You can hit open folder, which I almost always hit, which is a great feature. So it'll just take you right to that folder where the file was rendered. And then you can access and interact with the file from there. And you can open it in Media Explorer within Reaper to start using it in that way. Or you can hit this button right here that says add files to project. And if you never selected that before and you want to do it now, you still have the option to just hit that and it'll now add those files or that one file to your current project. Let's close that out. I'm gonna come down here and hit close, or you can hit the X up top, either or. Close this out. I'm gonna render something out a little bit more substantial. So we're gonna open this render window again. I'm gonna change what I'm outputting, what I'm gonna be rendering from as far as output. So just notice, based on what we just talked about, I'm not gonna show you every scenario, but based on the example I just showed, we rendered the selected tracks as stems, and that is being rendered from the actual tracks. So there's no master processing. So if you had plugins on your master bus and you want the render to bypass that, you would do this option, selected tracks. So you get the stems processed on the tracks, but not being processed through your master bus if you had plugins on that master bus. Then we have the option to do master mix plus stems. So it's gonna give you a master mix down file, one file, stereo file, which is the master mix, plus it'll also do the stems. And I'm assuming those stems are via the master? I'm not sure. Then we have selected tracks via the master, which is like what I did earlier when I rendered those 3 selected tracks, but it is also passing through the master bus processing. So whatever processing you have there, it will get rendered to the file. So you have those 2 options to do it without master bus processing and with master bus processing. Very well thought out options. Another one to look at will be the selected media items, which we're gonna look at that in a second. And then we have selected media items via master. So we're gonna look at those 2 scenarios in a second, but let's render out something in a more conventional way. We're gonna do master mix. I'm gonna do the time selection, and I'm gonna change the time selection to this area right here, which is one of the densest part of the mix because it is the chorus. That sounds like this. And remember, like I discussed, guys, all of this I'm doing, all the changing of selecting tracks and the render region range, I'm doing all of this with the render window still open. I don't have to close it, and everything is changing, and the render options are adjusting based on everything that I'm doing, but I don't have to close this window. I can still play the project. No problem. Render window still open. Nothing changes. I can be setting up the options while it's playing. No problem. And then I can start hitting render and it'll just stop and start rendering. So great features and just well implemented features. So we're gonna render that section, and I'm gonna change the file name convention here and just put HK rough for hook rough. I'll switch it to MP3. So it's gonna do based on the time selection, which is the time selection of the hook. It should be a pretty quick render, and everything else should be fine. So it says right here, render 1. I'm gonna hit the render. So it's rendering offline full speed, so it's gonna render way faster based on how powerful your computer is. So the cool thing about Reaper is you get this full view feedback of your render, and you get to see how much of a mess you made. So right now, I did this on purpose. Everywhere you see red is basically peaking, lots and lots of peaking, right? So one of the cool things about Reaper, and I just learned this recently, is you can click around this area. So if you notice up top here, you see the playhead moving around as I'm clicking down here, corresponding with the clicking that I'm doing in the render window. So it is in sync and lined up. You can click around. Let's say you wanted to put a marker at this spot. You can just click right here, and then you can right click and say insert project marker. You can give it a name and it'll now put a project marker right at that spot. If there were key spots that you were looking at that was distorting, let's say it wasn't such a mess. I did this on purpose. Let's say it was just 1 or 2 little spots where you had little red spikes where it is clipping. That's what that's signifying. It's marking the clipping spots. Then you can mark it here, and then because everything is synced between your render window and your project, you can add a marker. If you had a couple of spots, add some markers, and then you can go back to those spots and figure out why is it peaking there and deal with it. Or if you just want to turn the whole thing down, you're getting a lot of visual feedback. As you scrub through, it's giving you information about the peak right here. So at the different times, it's showing you what the peak information is as far as peak, LUFS, -M, and LUFS-S, which is dealing with sustained loudness and momentary loudness. So you get a lot of analytics right there. And if you want even more detailed analytics, you're gonna come down here to where it says stats/charts, and you hit that and you select open statistics charts in web browser, and it will do that. I think you have to be on the web. So it opened up on my browser on a different page. Let me drag that over so you can see that. And you will have a lot of data. And if you notice what's going on the screen, it's showing you all the data. So even as I'm scrubbing back and forth, down here it's showing you with all the different graphs at the different times. So you're seeing the peak versus the LUFS-M versus the LUFS-S. And if you understand all of these things, you can use this to analyze your mix and get really deep into what's going on. So you get this full detailed readout of your mix down or your master file. And if you're into analyzing all this data, it's all here. Very detailed, very over the top, very useful information. So, and then you can save that to a specific type of file that you could look at. So that's just one of the things that I don't think other DAWs does that, but it'll help you figure out what's going on with your mix and why it's peaking. So let me do another thing here. So let's go back to the render window, and I think I mentioned this last week. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna turn on the normalization, and there's some settings already set here. I'm gonna leave them as is. And then I'm gonna render, and you're gonna see what happens when I do that. It's going to render the file, and then it's gonna process the file separately afterwards with the limiting and the normalizing that I had set. So it's gonna look crazy at first, then it's gonna normalize it and limit it after the fact. So you're gonna see two processes running. It's gonna ask me to replace the file because the file name is the same. I'm gonna say yes. And there it is. Everything is crazy, it's peaking. It's peaking like crazy. And then it's gonna process using the normalizing settings that were there and also the limiting settings that I had set. So sometimes when I'm just doing a rough mix of something to listen and kind of analyze it creatively, because I'm in the process of producing and writing and building the track, I don't have time to set up, because it's not mix down time, it's not mastering time, and you need volume. So it's cool to have that feature. Hit normalize, set some settings, and you'll get a nice, good, solid volume, but things won't be peaking. It'll take care of all of that behind the scenes. And then when you don't want it, whatever you did last in that project, those render settings are gonna be the same. Whenever you get back to the project, the render settings are gonna be the way it was the last time you rendered that specific project. So I can go back now and I can turn off the normalization. And if I want it back on, I'll turn it back on. And the settings are gonna be the way it was the last time I did use it. So that's the normalization built right in to your render function. Okay, so now let's look at another use case. I'm gonna actually open and start a new project with the render window still open. That's crazy. Here we go. There it is. So we're in a new project and the render window is reflecting that we're in a new project. If I switch back to the tab with the previous project, my render window will change. You can see things are changing, options are changing when I switch back and forth. So very active, still floating, and you can still interact with the project. I'm gonna drag 2 sets of files in here. This one, let's do this, and this one. Okay, so here we have 2 sets of files. It's just a bunch of stuff that I recorded from some machines a while ago. I don't remember what machines they are, but they generate sound. So 808, 808s. So I'm gonna grab just like one hit here or there from some of these, because I'm gonna basically create a folder of just like one-shot drum hits. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna edit out most of this because I don't want it. And let's say I want this 808 here. And these are things that I do in like everyday scenarios. So I'm gonna slice this, get rid of that. So I want that. I'm gonna trim it a little bit. I turn my snapping off. Okay, so I want that. That'll be an 808. This will be an 808. Grab that. Right about there should be good. I want these, all these hat sounds. I can double click on them and I'm gonna type in HH1. Let's do all caps, HH1. Then I'm gonna double click on this one, HH2. Then I'm gonna double click on this one, HH3. So we got 3 different hi-hats. Down here we have 808. Let's call this 808_01. So we have these nice and chopped up. Double click on this. We're gonna call it 808_03. And that's it. So we got 3 808s and 3 hi-hats. I can now just double click on this track. It's gonna highlight all 3 of those audio clips or media clips, whatever you wanna call them. Then I can go to my render window, open that up, and then choose the source. So I'm gonna select to render it based on selected media items, which is right there. So once I select that, right now, it says render 1 file. Once I selected media items, it now says render 6 files. And now the reason why I went in and gave it the names, so I'm gonna definitely set this, take the tail off. I don't need a tail. Automatically the bounds is not even an option, it's grayed out. I can select a directory. Let's just go to the desktop, create a folder, and I'm gonna call it new samples, whatever, doesn't matter. Then I'm gonna hit OK. I'm gonna clear this name out. Then I will go to Wildcards and tell it media items. I want media items, and I'm going to select item. What I am doing is telling it what to base the name off. How is it going to name these files? So I'm telling it to name the files based on the clip name. And those are the names that I edited when I double clicked and I typed in 808_01, 808_02. That's what that was for. So based on the name of each clip, I'm gonna tell it, you're gonna name the file that you render based on the clip's name. So whereas before in the other example, we had it automatically name the files it rendered based on the track that it was on. In this case, they're all on the same track. So I wanted to label it based on the clip names. So you would go here, wildcard, go to media item, and then go to item. So once I select item, that code goes in there, $item, and we're gonna set everything to mono. This is fine, that's fine. Just go through all the settings, make sure everything is fine. If I wanted to do post-processing, I could normalize, all that good stuff. But no, we're good for this example. And then I am going to hit render and see we have 6 files to render. Let's do that. Rendered out 6 files. And see, it shows you here the names that they were rendered as. And because they're super short, it was very quick. But I can now hit open folder, and it's gonna open a folder and see they're now rendered in here. So now I have a new, I have 3 new 808s and 3 new hi-hats to add into my sampler and use them for a beat. So the wildcard option, you guys kind of get the idea with the wildcard option with labeling. It's a huge time saver, and it really automates that whole task of labeling files, rendering files, and just some really nifty features. The examples I showed are some of the things that I do, like from week to week. So that's some of my use case. There are way more use cases I see where people use it when they're doing sound design. This is one of the reasons why people like doing sound design in Reaper, because of the workflow and how they can quickly render and label things and archive things and label them properly. So when you're creating sample packs, one-shot samples, loops, stuff like that, this is always great when it comes time to render and render multiple things, multiple little things, and have them metadataed, labeled properly, and just have everything laid out the right way. And it has like these automated features to make some of these really arduous, finicky tasks very easy to pull off. Because labeling something like that can be a nightmare sometimes. So if your DAW can render it comprehensively, label it quickly, and just spit it out. The last thing we're gonna look at is the render queue. So there is a render queue. So let's say I wanted to render out the first half of the chorus here. I'm gonna select that area. I'm gonna open the render window. So we wanna do render from the master. We want to do the time selection. So it renders just between the time selection here. I'm gonna give it that same name. Let's call it hook part 1. Let's label it that. Everything else should be good. We can keep the normalized stuff on. Good, good, good. I'm going to change the directory. Yeah, let's change the directory. And I'm gonna call it parts. So we're gonna set it to render into that folder called parts. And instead of hitting render, we're gonna come down here where it says Q. Hit Q and hit add to render queue. So that top option there, we're gonna select that, and it just added it to the render queue. So now I can still come back and say, I'm gonna render out the intro all the way up to where the pre-chorus starts. I'm gonna select that region. Now it's gonna render from here to here. So we're setting it up so that it's gonna render from the beginning to right before the pre-chorus starts. So I'm gonna call this first verse. So I'm just gonna put VS1. We're going to the same folder. It's doing, the output is through the master, and the time selection is gonna dictate the region that's being rendered. So from bar 1 to bar 33. And once all that is set, it's still going to the same directory. We're gonna hit Q, add to render queue again. And then let's do one more. We're gonna select this pre-chorus. So we're now selected that range, and we're gonna say pre-chorus. I'm gonna type that in. And just like before, we're just gonna go to render queue, hit add to render queue. So now we added 3 different jobs to the render queue. I can actually add a 4th one. I can say, I wanna just hear the guitar. For the same region that's selected, I just wanna hear the guitar. Just wanna render that out. And so I have that soloed, and I'm gonna go to queue, add to render queue. And when I'm ready to render everything out now, I go to queue, and then I go open render queue. And the render queue is open, and you see all 4 renders. And then I can select 1 or 2, and then render selected. It's gonna render the selected cues, or I can hit render all, which I'm gonna do it, and then it's gonna render. Another thing I can do when I'm setting up my renders, I can change my directory. I can do a 5th render and have it render the whole song to a different directory, and then add that as a render queue. And whatever you tell it to do, it's just gonna get ready to do that. And the weird thing, the way it does it is when you hit render, it's gonna open a new tab and open the project the way you saved it for each specific render, and it's gonna render. And then when it's done, it's gonna close that tab and open a new tab and then load the next render in the state that you had it. So the fact that we have this one soloed, that one track is soloed, it's gonna open a whole new project with the track soloed and then render it out. And you can go, use the bathroom, take a pee break, go get a cup of coffee, go mow the lawn, depending on how long your render is. So you can set up massive render queue and then hit render all. So it's launching a whole new project, and then it's gonna render. And then now it's launching a whole new project and it's rendering. And it's gonna keep doing that until it's finished, based on all the settings that we set up and how we told it to render each section. And now it's done. And if you go to the folder, the files are there, blah, 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 all that good stuff. So that's just some, just a little of the options with rendering in Reaper. It is a lot, but like I said in the last video, it is very useful stuff, very well thought out features. They are still fine-tuning and refining the features, but it's just regular everyday features that you're gonna need. This is why sound designers and people that are creating sample packs, loop packs, one-shot sample packs, and things of that nature, dealing with creating sound effects and stacking files together and archiving that stuff. They like doing it in Reaper because of how automated some of these things are when it comes to rendering multiple things, repetitive rendering, labeling, archiving. So very, very deep, rich render settings, render options, well thought out features, not gimmicks, just useful everyday features that make sense and makes your life and your job easier. So that was rendering in Reaper, guys. Thanks for watching. And as always, you'll see me in the next video.